recipient. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, pray silence for Robert Aldridge, the Right Honourable Lord Provost of the City of Edinburgh. Sir.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome on this very cold, wet evening to Edinburgh, and welcome on screen as well to the 35th Edinburgh Medal ceremony, which is held here in the City Chambers in the City of Edinburgh Council. As the City Officer has just announced, I am the Lord Provost of Edinburgh, but I'm also rather honoured to be the President of the Edinburgh International Science Festival. This is not just a titular role, it recognises that the City of Edinburgh Council had the imagination, the confidence and the skill to create and launch what was then a unique event. To our great pleasure, we rapidly became the mother to other science festivals, first in Canberra, then Orkney, and we have representatives from Orkney here today, I know, and now they have spread to every part of the habited world. Nor is our festival just for 2.5 weeks in the spring of each year. For 6 months of the year, we tour primary schools in Scotland, working closely with teachers and tens of thousands of pupils. For secondary pupils, we put on the week-long Hive at the time they are choosing their hires. This allows the pupils to meet and talk directly to scientists and technologists working in all sorts of organisations and businesses to discuss the reality of working within science and technology. Another major element in our year-round work is on the climate emergency. Prompted by a previous medalist, Cristina Figueres, we have established the Net Zero Toolkit for small and medium enterprises so that they can build effective sustainability, and climate collabs. These latter are round tables for senior leaders of large businesses, government and academia. Stimulated by our presentations and our provocations, they create valuable and practical connections. These were perhaps unlikely to come about otherwise and can make climate change solutions into a reality. This engagement and commitment led us to being invited to organise a successful climate collab at COP28 in Dubai, a location that's familiar to us through our steady work over the last 10 years in Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. But although we were very pleased to contribute to COP28, it is the case that for all the promises and protestations of politicians and businesses across the world, carbon production has continued to grow consistently, relentlessly, and dangerously. That's why last Thursday, we and 64 other Scottish organisations signed an open letter to the Scottish Government. This was in response to the Climate Change Committee's report on our climate targets. We called upon the Government to fairly raise the funds needed to invest in faster climate action and to redirect the huge amount of public spending that's still going into climate-damaging investments. We want to work with public and private to deliver the urgent change needed. Amongst much else, this underlines the need for science festivals that consider not just the science and technology, but their social uses and purposes, and seek solutions that work for our common life, not just for private profit. Now, this evening's ceremony is to celebrate an example of just such a solution. But I would like to take just one moment here to mention another social treasure. It would not be appropriate not to note the imminent departure from Edinburgh Science of the long-serving director, Simon Gage. He's been at the heart not only of our justly famous science festivals, but also those activities that I've described earlier. He's led us through thick and thin, unceasingly created absolutely fantastic and wonderful events, initiated new activities, and always done so both with aplomb and humour, which is really important. He will be very, very sadly missed, and we wish him well. But I know he would be the first to turn away from this spotlight and wish it to be directed onto the Mario Negri Institute, which, of course, we will now do. Much will be said about the Institute this evening, and I'll not preempt it, but say only that it is a beacon of how science and technology should be carried out, and deserves not to be admired, or not only to be admired, but above all, to be emulated. So I would now very much like to invite Professor Alison Pollock to deliver the oration. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Lord Provost, it is an honour to deliver this oration on behalf of the Mario Negri Research Institute, Italy, and its director, who's sitting here, Professor Giuseppe Remuzzi. My thanks also go to Professor Wall and all you in the audience and staff who are making tonight possible. I'm afraid, Professor Giuseppe, you've arrived on a dreich day, and you're going to hear that word over and over again. So I hope Edinburgh hospitality will warm the cockles of your heart. We are living in the worst of times. The complicity of Western governments and our economic dependence on the military-industrial complex, which produces weapons of war for mass murder, has been laid bare for the world to see. The ongoing genocide in Gaza is a public health tragedy unfolding in real time and documented by the victims themselves. And there are parallels here with the medical industrial complex of the West, where millions of people across the world are dying because of lack of access to safe and affordable essential medicines and healthcare. We are living now in an era of unbridled corporate power and greed, and the vision of what science in the public interest should be is rapidly being lost. But we have a tiny glimmer of hope, and it lies in the philosophy of the Mario Negri Institute. What makes the Mario Negri Research Institute so different and so special is its focus on patients, not patents and not profits. Its creation in 1961 anticipated the need to protect the public interest against the rise of corporate power and commercial conflicts, which are so prevalent in medical research today. Why, you may ask, are patents so problematic in healthcare? And why is the Institute's mission so important? A medical patent is a privilege. It's an exclusive government-granted right which protects the inventor of a unique medical product, process, or technology against market competition. And a patent prevents a patent invention from being produced, sold, or used by competitors. So it shuts out competitors in the market. And of all the evils to beset modern medicine, patents are perhaps the greatest. Patents have been ruthlessly exploited by industry and governments in the West to drive up prices, create profits, and make medicines unaffordable to billions of people, and not just medicines. A huge body of research exists, and it shows how patent protection distorts medical research and public health priorities. It compromises the good conduct of clinical trials. It stifles innovation and creates enormous waste. Some of you in this audience will be surprised to learn that many, if not most, of the newest and costliest drugs launched into the market over the last 4 decades are of unproven effectiveness and little value or benefit compared to older drugs. But industry manipulates the patent process in a process known as evergreening to keep profits high. It protects its patents when they're due for expiry by making tiny changes to the original medicine, which they then claim are superior to the original, and then they withdraw the older products as the original patent expires and generics cannot enter. Insulin is a good example of this. For over 90 years, there was no generic version of insulin, and insulin remained on patent. And it is still to this day unaffordable to the millions who need it. Perhaps when we look back, insulin, along with penicillin, are the two greatest discoveries in medicine of the last centuries. These two medicines have saved countless millions of lives. But the Cambridge scientists who discovered penicillin, Fleming, Florey, Chain and Heatley, never patented their discovery. And the same goes for insulin. Frederick Banting discovered insulin in 1923, and he refused to put his name on the patent. He declared, "Insulin does not belong to me. It belongs to the world." And his co-investigators, Collip and Best, also felt it was unethical to profit from discovery that would save lives. So they sold the insulin patent to the University of Toronto for $1. They wanted everyone who needed medicine to be able to have it. But industry and Western governments have had other ideas, which is why insulin remained on patent at exorbitant prices for over 90 years, until as recently as 2015. Like the sales of military weapons, pharmaceutical sales are vitally important to the economies of many Western countries. The Danish company Novo Nordisk, which makes insulin, and now the new weight loss drug, has a market valuation of $500 billion. That's a value larger than the GDP of Denmark. And of course, industry increasingly, not government, calls the shots. Today, the profit-seeking behavior and motives of the medical industrial complex extends to our universities. Our universities have increasingly become commercial operations where patents and spin-out companies to generate profits from patient care are now seen as a laudable enterprise. Unlike the great scientists who discovered penicillin and insulin, many of our academics, our scientists, and our doctors are part of the complex labyrinth of commercial operations, owning IP with shares in spin-out companies and joint ventures. Forbes magazine publishes data on the scientists and doctors who have become pharma millionaires and billionaires. The doctors and scientists that developed COVID vaccines at Oxford University, all of whom were employed through taxpayer funds, have now become COVID vaccine millionaires. In the US, the scientists who worked in Harvard University and MIT, along with the chief officers of Pfizer and Moderna, have become COVID vaccine billionaires. The levels of wealth being generated from profiting from patents in medicine and ill health is frankly obscene. This model of research and profit-seeking also results in the neglect of research into diseases which are responsible for millions of deaths in low and middle-income countries. The vaccine for Ebola was unavailable because it sat undeveloped for 10 years, because it was perceived as unprofitable, and of course with catastrophic consequences when Ebola struck. There are many more such examples. The medical research model and its funding is broken. So the establishment of the Mario Negri Research Institute in 1961, under the leadership of Silvio Garatini, anticipated all of what I've now described. Its intention from the outset was to harness the private sector and put it to public use and public service, and above all, to end the commercial conflicts and competition which leads to so much research waste. Its mission is clearly set out in its chart of values and ethical conduct, and the importance of its principles cannot be overstated. The Institute refuses to pursue patents on the drugs and methods it develops. It is committed to transparency. There is no secrecy. It shares its research data with other scientists and makes its research data open source, completely unlike pharma industry. It is also tries to be independent of government, and so too is its funding model. It does not outsource control of its trials and research to pharmaceutical companies, where they can play and fudge the data. It is committed to public policies which will promote research into unmet clinical need. And it won't drop a new medicine development because the profit potential is too low. And above all, it's committed to promoting the public scientific understanding of science. So no wonder public trust in and support for the Institute is so strong. Living and working our values is not just a glib slogan that we see in most universities. It's a fact. The history of the Mario Negri Research Institute and some of its many remarkable achievements is recorded in the book Good Pharma. The Institute is indeed the antidote to bad pharma. It strives to undertake ethical research without commercial distortions. Edinburgh City Council is to be congratulated for awarding the Edinburgh Medal to this important and unique institute, and at this time it has never been more important. The values of Mario Negri are almost entirely missing from our universities and industry, where the research culture is blighted by commercial conflicts, competition, and profit-seeking behaviors. Mario Negri has been described as a bright light on a remarkable approach to conducting pharmacological research in the public interest, and we will hear more about it now. The Institute's research is motivated by a social mission centered on compassion for and responsibility to the vulnerable, sick, and suffering. It is an example which researchers in the UK and Scotland would do well to follow. So it gives me great pleasure to hear Giuseppe speak now. Thank you.
It's now my great honour to be able to read the medal citation 2024, which the illuminated version is on the table there for people to look at later. The Edinburgh Medal has been instituted by the City of Edinburgh Council to honour those who, through science and technology, have made a significant contribution to the understanding and well-being of humanity. The Edinburgh Medal for 2024 is awarded to the Mario Negri Institute in recognition of its exemplary role in conducting entirely open medical research, not for profit or governments, but freely available for the good of humanity. It has consistently engaged with the public, providing independent medical knowledge to all who seek it, and campaigns internationally for openness and transparency in all medical research. And it's now my great pleasure to award you, if I can open it, the medal.
Thank you very much to Lord Provost and to the City of Edinburgh, to all of you, for the beautiful work you have done during all these years, and for deciding to give this medal to the Mario Negri Institute. I was quite touched and honored. I think that everything has been said about the Institute in the oration. Maybe I have just to sit down and tell you we have finished, because everything has been said, beautifully, by the way. But if you don't mind, I've been asked to say something about the Mario Negri Institute and about our work. The history of the Mario Negri Institute dates back so many years ago, could you imagine? 1958. It was when, as you have already mentioned, Silvio Garattini was assistant in pharmacology in Milan University, and he met Mario Negri, a jeweler and philanthropist. Garattini has recently returned from US, and he had the idea of creating a non-profit organization that would, however, operate in the public interest and have the flexibility of a private institution. This vision fascinated Mario Negri, who designated in his will that a significant proportion of his estate to be used to establish a research institute that would bear his name, and this is exactly what happened. You have already heard about this book that tells the story of how an institute developed a research community grounded on trust, open science, and collaboration. We live in a world filled with misleading knowledge about drugs. Not only this, but medical practice has lost part of its moral integrity due to commercial influence. Mario Negri is the first Italian non-profit independent foundation dedicated to pharmacological research, and of course we are independent, patient-centric philosophy and policy, as you heard, of no patenting. Activities are concentrated into three mainstream: research, education, and dissemination. Now, Mario Negri constitutes of three different buildings. This is not actually the original one, it's a more modern one, where the institute has been established 15 years ago, but the original one was established in 1963, and the research in pharmacology was particularly devoted to neurodegenerative disease, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and public health. In 1984, a new institute has been established in a city near Milan called Bergamo, where we are mainly looking at immunological disease, immunology in general, kidney disease, and transplantation. And a clinical research center has been established in a village near to Bergamo in 1992, devoted to rare disease, something which is extremely important for patients. Some people ask me, what about funding? We have heard about independence, we have heard about difficult relationship, dialogue between us and pharmaceutical industry, independence from government. Where are our sources of funding coming in? 35 is competitive tenders and Italian and foreign funding. 35 is scientific project in collaboration with companies. 7% is institutional fund from Ministry of Health. 16% unrestricted donation from private citizen or foundation, and 7% bequest. Since 1963, we had 90,236 trainees. More than 90,000 of them were foreigners. Altogether, 1,600 scientific publications in scientific journal. Now, the Institute has 6,000 researchers. We don't have a gender issue. 65% are female. Distributed in 10 research departments and a clinical research center that you have seen. One thing that I believe is important is that many research organizations in Italy are led by individuals who have received their training at the Mario Negri Institute. Many director of institute, scientific director of university department, most apical position in medical science are led today by people that have been trained at Mario Negri. But there is something which I consider even more important, and this is the number of people who have trained in the Mario Negri Institute that have important position all over the world. And I am particularly fond of these red dots that shows people who are actually institute director, department chairman, and university dean. In Chile, we have a person trained in the Mario Negri, who was a university dean. We have a medical artist in my group that is creating slides, and this is more artist than medical, and in fact has created a dot in the sea, but this should have been in Spain, actually. I have difficulties in telling you what is the Mario Negri Institute, besides the fact that it has been in the oration explained beautifully. I don't want myself to tell you what is the Mario Negri Institute. So I think that one of the best reasoning on the Mario Negri Institute has been generated by Richard Horton, who is here in the audience. He is the editor of The Lancet, and this is too generous that I have also difficulties in reading. So I prefer you to read what Richard said about the Mario Negri Institute. What we have done, one of the important achievements back in '86, published in The Lancet, by the way, was the GC study, followed by a number of other GC studies. Altogether, I think that were 4 or 6. The Institute, throughout this particular study, introduced a drug for patients who have suffered from heart attack, which has since saved millions of lives. I think that this is an important achievement for the Mario Negri Institute, for people who are suffering for heart attack, and for The Lancet that decided to take the paper. We have discovered the role of inflammation in epilepsy and Alzheimer's disease by studying a number of innovative medication. We found that cerebral accumulation of prion protein fragment plays a role in nerve cell degeneration and related encephalopathies, including chronic degenerative disease of the brain. More recently, after many years of animal research, students and research at the Mario Negri Institute developed a new marine-derived drug, trabectedin, which has improved survival outcome for patients with a rare form of sarcoma. You see the shrinking of the tumor in rats after the administration of an extract of this marine-derived drug that later on was tested in patients and found to be important. The Institute has also established an Italian group for evaluation of intervention in intensive care medicine. There are more than 200 intensive care units associated with this group. It's called GVT, and this group is evaluating the performance of the several intensive care units in Italy. No one knows about the performance of the other, but they know about their performance as compared to the mean. Here is to the mean, the average is here, and those intensive care units that are localized along this line are performing better than the mean. Those which are localized on this line are performing less than the mean. And this allows people that know where they have difficulties in a number of day-by-day activities to ameliorate. And in the first 6 months, for 2033, for instance, 61% of intensive care units showed improvement. I think that this, in terms of public health, is important. We have been among the first to analyze water for illicit drugs. And we are in the position to tell people in various cities in Italy where they have difficulties with illicit drugs, in which day of the week, whether there is difficulties with one drug versus another, more use of cocaine or heroin or whatever, you can precisely tell people, and this will help in terms of public health. More recently, we have used this knowledge to look at the antibiotic resistance, viral surveillance. It was important during SARS-CoV-2. And now this activity is spread out in all Europe and in fact even in US, in the other part of the world. And it was thanks to activities like this that recently it has been established that polio virus circulate in places where one can not imagine, for instance in London. Throughout these activities, we have recently associated something which is called la ricerca dei contaminati emergenti nel Po. This is the River Po, and this is where we do activities in sampling water in order to see whether you have drugs in the river, antibiotics, personal care product eliminated in excessive amount, disinfectant, emerging contaminant, and other contaminant that can be important to know to protect the health of people in these areas. We have a National Health Service, as you have a National Health Service. Your National Health Service is much, much older than ours. Our National Health Service started in 78. It was imagined after your national health system. You did that in 48, 30 years before us. And when it was announced, I saw something which is shocking to me. They said, when they launched the National Health Service in England and Wales, it was on the walls, you all are paying for it, mainly as a taxpayers, but it will relieve your money worries in time of illness. Can you imagine that? Relieve your money worries in time of illness is the most important sentence I think has never been pronounced or written. This is a secret of something of which we have to be jealous. Relieve your money worries in time of illness. Very civilized sentence. And you know, this was a king of England that one day told a prominent surgery in Paris called Jacques Tenon. Jacques Tenon was a great surgeon. And he wanted to create an hospital in Paris. And this hospital is now there, it's called Hôpital de Dieu. And he went to see your king, George III. And the king said, strength and the national prosperity are achieved only by protecting the health of a large population. This is king responsibility. Isn't that unbelievable? We don't, you have king still, we don't, which I'm not sure is a shame considering the kind of king we are used to have. But if you don't have a king, you have a government. It means that this is a government responsibility. And this is something just unbelievable. If you are talking about strength and national prosperity, the health of people is the most important thing. So health and national health service for all citizens, as the king said, is something that has to be on the top of government interest. We have a national health system, but our national health system is in great difficulties. Profound crisis of health system. You know, you have the balance that is in red, waiting list, and the possibility to be cured is not for all the region of Italy. Something is good, something is average, something is very bad. And we have lost the important significance of the national health system in favor of what you have seen before in the oration is considered the industry of health, as one of the editors of the New England Journal of Medicine, Bud Rellman, told 40 years ago. But you have the same problem. You have people on the street that are talking about problem with the national health system, exactly as we have. It is a tragedy. It is your tragedy, is our own tragedy. And this man, that is de facto a professor of epidemiology and public health at the University College of London, said something which is very important. If you had the hypothesis that the government was seeking to destroy the National Health Service, all the data that we are seeing are consistent with that hypothesis. They may say, no, it's exactly what our politicians say. No, we are taking care of the national health system. That's not what we are seeking to do. But if you look at the data, things are started deteriorating. Not just after the pandemic, not just after the war in Ukraine, from 2010. I have no special insight into what motivates ministers, but they are not behaving as if they want to preserve our national health system. Why is it so important to preserve our national health system? Because otherwise, we are on a slope that inexorably will bring us here. What is wrong? They tell you. This man, who is an epidemiologist in Boston, Massachusetts, said the grip of financial self-interest in US healthcare is becoming a trap with dangerous and pervasive consequences. No sector of US healthcare is immune from the immoderate search for profit. Neither drug company, nor insurers, nor hospital, nor investor, nor physician practices. So, when I have the occasion to say something like that in Italy to doctors or to laymen, they said, well, they have insurance. Make one, and you are fine. Now I show you the most important slide of my talk. And the most important slide is il bar della povera gente. From this photograph, Vincenzo Balocchi in Florence. Remember, il bar della povera gente. In Italy, we have 300,000 people that are poor. So could you imagine these people, they want to have a coffee? They go to this bar, il bar della povera gente. Will they have money to pay an insurance? To have a transplantation of cardiac surgery, of some surgery for abdominal cancer? So the Mario Negri Institute is working with physicians, patients, nearly 11,000 patients aged 16 years of older, 107 Italian internal medicine. This is one project only. Geriatric wards and more than 300 clinician investigators involved in trying to see how the drugs are used in terms correct use, not use drugs which is not correct for these particular patients, combination of drugs and things like that. This is just one project, and this is the register of multimorbidity and polypharmacy that generating 62 original articles in this public health field. This is just an example. There is something which is bizarre in medicine, and is look at the cover of important journal, Economist, Newsweek, Time Magazine. You see diabetes, malaria, AIDS. cancer. But the most important problem in medicine is kidney disease. You see millions of people affected by kidney disease as compared to diabetes, just half. And consider that 50% of these patients with diabetes had diabetic nephropathy. And those who die are the ones that have diabetic nephropathy. And this, look at how this number compares with cancer and HIV. But if you look at what people are told is certainly not the most important problem. That's why the Mario Negri Institute devoted most research, particularly in Bergamo, on renal disease, which is absolutely neglected. And there is no funds for renal disease. Everything goes to cancer, goes to diabetes, goes to heart disease. So we started many years ago with the idea of trying to retard renal disease progression to the point of having less and less and less people needing dialysis or transplantation. And what we have achieved in this RAIN study that has been published in The Lancet in 1998 is 80% reduction in need of dialysis if you start soon. Preventing progression of renal disease is possible. But certainly you have genetic disease of the kidney, you have a number of other diseases, you have infections, you have interstitial nephritis due to drugs and other chemicals. You cannot stop everything from progressing, so you need transplantation. Since the first transplantation in 1954, more than 2.5 million transplant has been performed in the world, not only kidney, majority of kidney, of course, but liver and heart. But there is a disproportionate, which is one thing that is very important for us, between organ transplant and people on waiting list. So one possibility was, this is a professor of theater that came to me from Rome, saying, I am 80 years old, I am involved in theater, we have discussed about theater because I have some interest, but he said, I want to have a transplantation, I want to have a kidney. And we generated a protocol for transplanting 2 marginal kidneys from all donors into 1 recipient, showing that under certain conditions, 2 kidneys that are from an old person, so not perfect. However, they work exactly as a perfect one. And this expanded the donor pool considerably. And this is something that has created attention in the medical community. The paper has been published in the New England Journal of Medicine this time, and was also reported in the New York Times on January 2006. Another preoccupation that I personally have, and it is very important, is you do a transplantation. So you have a new kidney, a new heart, a new lung, but you have to take medication for all your life. And this medication create the condition for having, after transplantation, infection or cancer, because they are immunosuppressant. In order to prevent rejection, you have to give this all the life of an individual who has a transplant. So we try to minimize the anti-rejection drugs. And one of the problems is, of course, to avoid infection and cancer, but also to avoid the transformative effect of this medication on your body shape, on your face. Since a few years ago, when you had a person with a transplant coming into your office, you could just diagnose the fact that this person had a transplantation because this face was completely transformed. Do you believe that this girl had a transplant, taking anti-rejection medication 10 years ago, minimizing anti-rejection medication with attention, with, of course the patient is important. You have to have a patient that understands what he's doing. But this is something that has been achieved. We want to do more, because one of the major questions remaining in clinical transplantation is whether it will be possible to induce a state of true tolerance with little or no long-term drug therapy. We have done this in rats, transplanting renal tissue into the thymus. In this way, you educate the thymus to generate cells that do not reject the transplant when they see the same tissue. It works in rat, it was in New York Times, it was in The Lancet, it works in non-human primates. It's very difficult to have it working in humans, so we moved to another possibility in order to induce tolerance, because the problem of tolerance is these particular cells. They are called activated CD8 memory cells, and we use mesenchymal stem cells in order to regulate the excessive activity of CD8 memory T cells. Those cells that generate so-called interferon alpha gamma are very difficult to regulate. But with mesenchymal stem cells, we have been able to induce tolerance in mice. The most beautiful part of the slide is not so much that if you don't use mesenchymal stem cells, you have 10 days survival, more than 100 days if you have mesenchymal stem cells. The most important part of the slide is this girl. This is a technician who is a microsurgeon that can do renal transplantation in mice. The kidney is like this. Nadia is also doing this in rats, of course. He's doing cardiac transplantation in rats. He's doing liver transplantation in mice. So I think we have to be grateful. And you have to understand how important is animal research to medicine and to people. After these results, after so many years of studying and doing animal experiment and human experiments, we have been able to have a patient's mesenchymal stem cell infusion before transplantation, then transplantation. Creatinine, which is a marker of renal insufficiency, goes down after transplantation, then we start to decrease immunosuppressive therapy more and more and more, and now you have these patients, which probably is the first patients in the world who is living without anti-rejection medication. And we want to do more. We want to be able to have tolerance achieved for every transplant and every people. Rejection works like that. You have an antigen present in cells, this is this one, that present to effector T cells that are white cells circulating in your blood, a peptide, which is a transplant peptide. Those peptide is an allopeptide, is different from the tissue of your body, is presented to your cells, and these cells start to proliferate, 10 cell, 1,000 cell, 10,000 cell, 1 million cells, and they do reject the organ due to this peptide, which is recognized as foreign. It has to be presented by antigen-presented cell to your lymphocytes, but this activity, this dialogue, need two particular proteins that binds together in order to create this dialogue. What we would like to do is to have a nanomedicine constituted by a core of a nanoparticle attached to the same proteins that presents the foreign antigen, and an antigen that in this case is not the foreign one, but is the one that is generated during inflammation after surgery, during initial phase of rejection. In this inflamed tissue, a number of peptides and proteins are generated. If you do, thanks to this nanomedicine, present to your cells, to your T cells, to your lymphocytes, in the context of this nanomedicine, this particular peptide is not an allopeptide, it's a regular peptide of inflammation. But you don't have, in this case, these two proteins that create the dialogue. So these cells transform effector cells into regulatory cells. And you are capable of modulating the immune reaction. So what we do is we would like to turn the harmful tissue injury caused by the insult and early inflammation into a protective response for the organ, creating a local tolerogenic environment. Nothing systemic, no infection, no cancer, because everything occurs locally. This is a European project, is supported by European community, and is a project that includes the Mario Negri as a leader, a group in Canada, and a group in Spain. As for what we have done in renal medicine, again, I don't want to say that we have done something important, I don't know. Let's have Dr. Brenner, who is professor of nephrology at Harvard University, very tough man, but very nice man, telling about us. And I don't want to read, I want you to read what Dr. Brenner said about Mario Negri. He's very generous, that's why I don't want to read. There is nothing so complicated for a patient not to be able to put a name on their disease. And so we established a clinical research center which involved in the care of 32,000 patients diagnosed with one of the 1,000 rare diseases. We started before anyone else to talk about rare disease in Europe, not in US. In US they started before. But we have been the first in this clinical research center, which is an old villa near Bergamo, and this is 30 years in a race. I don't want to go into details. I only can tell you that we are the coordinating center in the region Lombardy about rare disease, so we know everything about people who have rare disease in Lombardy. We have a region, we have a registry, we know how many patients have this and that disease, so if something happens, we can tell patient, look, there is a new medication for your so difficult disease to treat. This is one of the registry we have. It was for a disease in which we have been involved since so many years. It was a registry originated for being a registry in North Italy. Then it was a registry that had samples or requests for genetic studies or for counseling from all Italy. And as you can see, many places in the world are sending us DNA or asking questions or patients for this disease, which one time was a very dramatic disease. Patients free of events, that is dialysis of that, after 6 years, we are only 20%. And the reason for being involved in EDUS was that we have seen so many young boy or girl dying of this disease that many years ago I told my colleagues, look, we have to devote some of our research to this disease. If we knew everything about this disease, we will be able to sleep at night. But if we don't do research, we are not in the hemolytic uremic syndrome as leader, not for the fame, but for the patients. This will be very difficult for us when a patient dies or is going into dialysis. A patient may have bad prognosis, but if you know everything about the disease, it's much easier for you to accept that. Now there is a drug developed by drug company. Drug company, they do fantastic thing. Look at this. This is patient dying or dialysis. Not a single one after this medication. What's the problem? The problem is cost. This is 560,000 euro per patient per year. It's like if you have to buy a Ferrari. There is a Ferrari where I work, they do brakes for Ferrari. And they told me there is a Ferrari, not the most expensive one. One of those Ferrari is exactly 560,000. but you have to have enough money to buy a Ferrari every year. We have a national system, they do that for us, you all pay. This is an example. There are many with this cost that are fantastic. People who don't die any longer. But I told this at meeting, even when meetings are sponsored by the same people who sell this drug. And this is a little embarrassing because you are showing the Ferrari and those who are sponsoring the meeting are in the back, you know. Never mind, it costs like this, even if you talk about these things. And more than that, look at the poor people. There are poor people in poor part of the world that there are no way, there is no insurance, there is no national health system, there is no nothing. And those have to die. This is something for which we have to fight every day. When I had the chance to be the president of the World Society of Nephrology, my meeting was in South Africa, and we had two opening lectures. One from Desmond Tutu, Archbishop. Everyone was absolute silence when he entered the room. It was an experience. And the second lecture was from Richard, who is here in the audience. We realized that between 10 and 12 million people died prematurely in 2022 because they did not have access to renal replacement therapy. This figure is double the number of deaths due to tuberculosis, malaria, and AIDS combined. So we launched at that meeting, in that moment, the idea that 0 people should die of preventable death from acute kidney injury by 2025. 2025 is now, but 0 is a big number. But certainly, acute kidney injury is something by which you can fix the problem if you have the possibility to cure the patient for 15 days. Then they return to normal life. So this is really a preventable death that all of us should be capable of fixing one day or another. So what are we going for these people? Nothing. This is not even included on the WHO agenda. Treatment with acute kidney injury, which is a reversible disease, has to become a part of the human right to health. This is a combination of thinking between me and Richard Orton, but is 10% me and 90% Richard Orton. Thank you very much for your attention.
On behalf of everybody in this room this evening, I really want to thank you, Professor Remuzzi, for your eloquent, impassioned, and also entertaining presentation of work on the research, the science, and the philosophy of the Mario Negri Institutes. You very persuasively argued that scientific and clinical research should not be done in isolation. It shouldn't be done in the pockets of pharma, but rather there should be a real partnership with those who live with disease to address their needs, their lived experience, and to benefit public health. I think you've described a really kind of virtuous circle of going from bedside, looking at the real problems in the world, the health problems, to bench, and then back to bedside again, that I think many of us who work in biomedical research around the world should be trying to emulate. With our aging society and the pressures on healthcare systems around the world, which you've reinforced to us today, this makes your message more important than ever, and we certainly tonight hear it loud and clear. So the weather outside might be dank and dreek, but in this room tonight, we at least feel enlightened by listening to you and your work. So we thank you again, and we wish you well in your very important mission. Thank you very much.